Hi, so we continue with community indifference curves and trade. So in this video, we are now going to look at the basis for trade and the gains. So we still use increasing costs so that we see how nations will behave if they are not completely specializing. Okay, so a difference in relative commodity prices, remember, is what we said to be the basis for comparative advantage and therefore forms the basis for mutually beneficial trade. And that we said a nation with a lower relative commodity price will have a comparative advantage in that commodity and a comparative disadvantage in the other commodity, while a nation with a higher comparative relative commodity price will have a comparative disadvantage in that commodity and a comparative advantage in the other commodity. So then with that, it means that we also mentioned the nation will then specialize in producing the commodity where it has a higher comparative advantage compared to the other commodity, or it will specialize in producing a commodity of its comparative advantage and leave the commodity of its comparative disadvantage to its trading partner. So with that, then we can look at this structure. Let's assume that nation 1 is in autarky at point A. So nation 1 is in autarky at point A, and that given this point A, we see that the slope of this indifference curve at point A as well as the PPF is 1/4, which we computed in our previous session. And therefore, this means that nation A1 has a comparative advantage in the production of commodity X. With this, it means that nation 1 will specialize in producing commodity X, and therefore it will move all the way to point B until the international terms of trade are equal to those of nation 2. And this is assumed to be at point B. And we will see that if we bring in nation 2 in the analysis, we see that nation 2 then will be in autarky at point A prime, where the domestic terms of trade are equal to 4, which is high, and therefore, as such, it will have to move up the indifference curve by specializing in commodity Y, which is a commodity of its comparative advantage. So when nation 1 is at point B, it means it has produced more of X and less of Y because it is producing this commodity at a lower cost. And as such, nation 1 can exchange some units of X with nation 2 for the units of Y. If we assume that nation 1 exports 60X to import 60Y, then nation 1 will consume at point E, where 60 of X is exported and the 60 of Y is imported. If we go to nation 2, if nation 2 specializes in producing commodity Y, it will move all the way to point B until the world price, the international terms of trade for nation 2 equals that for nation 1, and this is occurs at 1. In other words, we see that for nation 2, the slope will be going up, it will be increasing from 1/4 all the way to 1, while for that of nation 2, it will be declining down to 1. And at point B, if nation 2 trades 60Y for 60X, that is trading 60Y for 60X, then nation 2 will consume at E prime. Now we see that at E prime, so compare E prime, first compare E here for nation 1 and A. In autarky, nation 1 was consuming 50 of X, but now with trade, nation 1 is consuming 70 of X, meaning nation 1 has gained 20 units of X. In the same way, we see that in autarky, nation 1 was consuming 60 units of Y, but with trade, nation 1 is consuming 80 units of Y, which means that nation 1 has gained 20 units of Y. Therefore, nation 1 has gained 20 units of X and 20 units of Y as a result of specialization and trade. If we come to nation 2, we see that if we compare A prime and A prime, we see that nation 2 was consuming 80 units of X in autarky, but with trade, nation 2 is consuming 100 units of X, meaning nation 2 has gained 20 units of X. And if we compare it in terms of commodity Y, we see that in autarky, nation 2 was consuming 40 units of X, so this comes to 40, and then 40 units of Y, but now it's consuming 60 units of Y, which means that nation 2 has gained 20 units of Y. Therefore, nation 2 has gained 20 units of X and 20 units of Y as a result of specialization and trade. Okay, so now let's build this further. Let's look at the production gains from specialization. Now, we have noted that with specialization, the total gains to be shared between the two nations is 40 units of X and 40 units of Y, because we saw that nation 1 gained 20 of X and nation 2 gained 20 of X, which means that 40 units to be distributed between the two nations. Now, because we've already analyzed how these gains are distributed on the graph, we'll just run through the table so that we see, suppose we didn't have the graph, how were we going to identify that nation 1 has gained 20 and nation 2 has gained 20 of X. Let's look at the table below. So in this table, we see that before specialization, nation 1 was producing 50 units of X and 60 units of Y, and nation 2 was producing 80 units of X and 40 units of Y, which means that the world production, given that we only have two nations in the world, will be 130 of commodity X and 100 of commodity Y. With that, we see that now, suppose that we allow the two nations to specialize in the production of a commodity of each nation's comparative advantage. It means we are going to see a change in the volumes of production. And as such, we see that after specialization, nation 1 is going to produce 130 of X and 20 of Y. And from this, we can see that nation 1 has increased the production of commodity X because commodity X is the commodity of its comparative advantage. And also we can see that nation 1 has reduced the production of commodity Y to 20 from 60 because commodity Y is a commodity of its comparative disadvantage. Therefore, nation 1 will produce 130 units of X and 20 units of Y after specialization. If we come to nation 2 reduces the production of commodity X to 40 from 80, and then increases the production of commodity Y to 120 from 40. And if we see that the world production after specialization has increased to 170 of X from 130 and 140 of Y from 100. If we are to get the gains from the production gains from specialization, we see that if we subtract for X, if we subtract 130 after specialization minus the 50 before specialization, we will end up with 80, meaning the net gain is 80 for nation 1 in terms of commodity X. And then if we come to commodity Y, if we subtract the after specialization production of 20 minus the pre-specialization production of 60, we end up with a negative 40 units of Y produced. And then we see that for nation 2, the net, remember here we are checking the net gains. So if we come to nation 2, after specialization, nation 2 produces 40 of X, and before it was producing 40 of Y, meaning the net gain will be negative 40. And then for commodity Y, it has produced 120 after specialization, and before it was producing 40 units of Y, and the net gain therefore will be 80. And if we add the two for commodity X, for nation 1 and nation 2 for commodity X, we see that the total gain will be 40 for X, and then here we also see that the total gain will be 40 for Y. Now then, how do we distribute these commodities between nation 1 and nation 2? And that will show us the gains for each nation. Okay, so let's show the consumption gains from trade. Now with trade, nation 1, we call it nation 1, so we can change this to nation 1, okay, and this to nation 2. So with trade, nation 1 consumes 70 units of X and 80 units of Y, while nation 2 consumes 100 units of X and 60 units of Y. And if we show this on the table, we see that these amounts before trade are the autarky production amounts. So if you compare these two columns, you will see that they are the same production volumes before specialization. And therefore, because a nation will consume what it has produced in autarky, the production levels will be equal to the consumption levels. So we have 130 consumed of X for both nation 1 and 2, and 100 of Y. Now after trade, we noted that nation 1 will consume 70 of X and 80 of Y. And if we compare these with the pre-trade consumption volumes, we see that there is a gain. So for X, we are subtracting the after trade minus the pre-trade, so that we realize a 20 net gain. And for commodity Y, nation 1 will consume 80 after trade, and if we subtract the 60 before trade, we see that nation 1 gains 20 units of Y. In the same way, we can find the net gains for nation 2 by subtracting 100 of X consumed after trade minus the 80 before trade, which will give us 20, and the 60 of Y after trade minus the 40 of Y before trade, which will give us 20. And if we add the 20, the after trade, the net gain for nation 1 and that for nation 2, we get the total gains of 40 in terms of commodity X and 40 in terms of commodity Y. So clearly we see that this is what will happen between the two nations, that nation 1 will gain 20 of X and 20 of Y, while nation 2 will gain 20 of X and 20 of Y. So this therefore explains to us or helps us analyzing how the gains from trade, from production or specialization can be distributed between or among nations, assuming that we are considering more than two nations. Okay, so now let's look at the equilibrium relative commodity price with trade and how it is determined. So it should be understood here that what we've used so far is a trial and error to arrive at the equilibrium relative commodity price. But however, where we are going, especially when we look at the offer curves, we will be able to come up with our equilibrium relative commodity price. So at the equilibrium relative commodity price, the amount of X that nation 1 wants to export must be equal to the amount of X that nation 2 wants to import. Because remember, we said that the export of one nation must be equal to the import of the other nation for the two nations to be in equilibrium. And as such, we should note that the opposite will be true, that at the equilibrium relative price, the amount of Y that nation 1 wants to import must be equal to the amount of Y that nation 2 wants to export. Okay, so with that then, any relative price could not persist because trade would be unbalanced. We noticed that at the relative commodity price of 1/4, nation 1's production was gravitating towards the world price of 1. And therefore, any trade which would have occurred in between was not going to be the equilibrium trade. So only when the two nations are trading at the international terms of trade are we going to realize equilibrium. So it means that then if the relative commodity price is greater than 1, which we have defined as our international terms of trade, this means that nation 1 would want to export more of X than nation 2 would be willing to import at this higher price. So because nation 2 is okay to trade or to produce and exchange commodities all the way to the price of 1, Anything above this price will mean that the commodities then are more expensive for the nation to import, and as such, nation 1 would want to export more because a higher price will mean a higher profit for the nation. But a higher price for nation 2 will mean a loss for the nation if they buy that commodity. And we see also that if the price is less than 1, then nation 2 would want to import more of X because X now is cheaper, and as such, nation 1 would not be willing to export at this low price because nation 1 then will be making a loss. So we should therefore note that the greater nation 1's desire is for Y and the weaker nation 2's desire is for X, the closer the equilibrium price with trade will be to 1/4. And remember that this 1/4 is the autarky equilibrium price in nation 1. And thus, the smaller will be the nation's share of the gains. And if we gravitate away from this value, it means that from this 1/4, it means that then nation 2 will be increasing the gains from the trade that it will have with nation 2. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. If you have questions, please send an email to muauelias@gmail.com. I'll see you in session 7. Bye-bye.